Hello, my name is Sharon Gardner, and this is my presentation on mobile web app design and development. So mobile apps have a couple advantages over websites. One of them, a primary one, is they're always visible on your device's screen, so because it's always in front of you, it's more likely that people are going to use it versus, say, a traditional website, which makes these a great tie-in with an institution or library to promote use. When you're talking about developing a mobile app from scratch, and this is for people who know coding and are comfortable doing it themselves, there's a couple things you're going to have to take into consideration, and I'm going to give you a high-level overview on some of these items, but things like the programming language that you use are going to depend on the type of app you're building. Another thing that you're going to require is what's known as an MBOSS, or Mobile Backend as a Service. So similar to DigitalOcean or any sort of web hosting, you will need a mobile backend as a service because obviously your phone or mobile device is not going to be powerful enough to necessarily store all of the data that you need for your mobile app. So Salesforce is an example of a MBOSS. They offer app building services. They also will handle the backend, much like regular server maintenance. They will handle all of that sort of back-end servicing for you. And there's a couple different types of mobile apps out there. There are three main types, which is native, hybrid, and progressive web apps, or PWAs. Native apps are ones that are meant to only work on a specific system. So for example, the iPhone has iMovie, Android has Tasker. You'll notice that these are apps that are optimized specifically for that operating system. Another pro of having a native app is people tend towards device loyalty. iPhone users tend to buy new iPhones. Samsung, people tend to buy Galaxy phones one after the other. There's really not a lot of cross-pollination with that. A big downside of native apps, though, is that it only works for that specific operating system. So if you're looking to make your app widely available, this might not necessarily be the way to go. Some of the programming languages involved with native apps are things like, for example, for the operating systems, you'll see Swift is the big one. Another option is Objective-C. For Android, they have Android Studio, Java, and Kotlin. For hybrid apps, these can be used across multiple platforms. Most of the mobile apps on your phone or device tend to be hybrid apps. For example, Netflix. Most gaming apps are hybrid apps because these are apps that are able to be more widely distributed and you don't need device loyalty or a specific device to run them. One of the problems with hybrid apps, though, is you're not always going to have peak function on every device. You may find that an app that works well on your iPad might not necessarily work so well on a Galaxy tablet. So programming languages that are often used for hybrid apps are things like JavaScript, Cordova, React Native, Python for some of the backend and data handling, and for C# is another programming language for hybrid apps. Another type of app, progressive web apps, are websites that look and feel like an app. They're downloaded the same way that you download mobile apps through your platform store. Pinterest is actually an example of a progressive web app. If you have Pinterest on your phone or mobile device, you'll notice that you'll have various little tiles, and as you go through and you click on a tile, it'll automatically refresh your screen to show you more of the pins that you might be interested in. Progressive web apps, when you're downloading the progressive web app, you're not actually downloading an app per se. What it is you're downloading a shell for that web function to run through. Pros for the progressive web apps is that these are much cheaper to build and maintain. It's something like a 1-to-10 ratio. It costs 1/10 of the cost of a normal mobile app to create a progressive web app. And there's not a need to redirect traffic from your app to a website. For example, if you have something like the Woot app, or you're trying to make purchasing, Etsy's another one, they tend to redirect traffic for you to complete your purchase online onto the actual website. One of the problems with progressive web apps is that they're not as functional without an internet connection. It may store some internal data on your phone when you opt not to, for example, if you set it to Wi-Fi only or only work when you have an internet connection, you might not be able to access all of the features. Programming languages that you find for progressive web apps are things like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So essentially what we've been using to build websites is what you're going to be using primarily in building progressive web apps. Progressive web apps will also sometimes include code to help performance on specific devices, like they'll integrate code for Swift to work on iPhones. Let's face it, that was a lot of information, and it all looks like a lot of work, and I'm lazy. So how can I build a mobile app the easier way? There are other options if you don't want to learn an entirely different programming language. There are options such as low code for those that understand some programming but not enough to go it alone or want toolkits to make the work easier. Companies that are out there that offer low code app builders are things like Ionic, which is actually from MIT, and that's run via Git. Appian, OutSystems is another one for low code. If you want to go even further than low code, there is no code. No code takes low code to one step further. It's basically drag and drop to build an app. You don't get as much flexibility, but it is a nice way to start. So companies that are focused on no code, you may have seen some of these in search engine ads. So things like AppyPie, MobineCube, and Adalo are out there as no-code options. So now that I've thrown all of that information at you, let's do a quick demonstration on how a no-code app builder works. So the one I've chosen to focus on is Adalo, and with Adalo, it is literally drag and drop. I had already created a sample app here, so as you can see, it has 4 screens. So I have a splash screen for when the app first loads. It'll automatically transition to my home screen. That's what this little arrow is for. It shows your transition. So it flows from splash to home. Home has a login, which leads to entering your email and password, which leads to a card screen. Now, this is just an overview here. On the side here, you can go through branding, which is your color scheme options. There are your various screens, and you can opt to add screens that way or through the ad at the top here. Database is for things like, for example, my login screen. I needed to create some user data in order to actually be able to log into my app. So I set up a dummy user using the database function. And of course, settings are just settings. Publish we'll get into in a minute, and then it gives you analytics for once you publish your app. It'll allow you to do some recording and feedback. I'm in the free version right now, which lets me build apps and lets me preview certain types of apps, in particular progressive web apps, but not, for example, an iPhone app or a Samsung app. And the big reason for that is because the monthly fee, if I wanted to actually go through the cost of, the process of building an actual app and making it fully available, hybrid across all platforms, it's going to cost me about $65 a month for the hosting and the build and all of that other good stuff. So we're going to do the free version because we like free. As you can see here, I've created this app. I'm going to go ahead and actually add a screen. So for example, well, before I add the screen, let me just show you a couple features on, for example, the splash screen. So I can change the text, I can change the image, I can change the buttons. I have an additional button. If I want to add a component to the screen, I can. So for adding a component, it shows you the most used, which is usually text, button, simple list, app bar, image, and form. As you scroll down, it gets a little more detailed. You can explore the marketplace. That's more for paid users. I'm not going to go ahead and do that, but what I am going to do is I'm going to go to the splash screen and look at my actions. So for my action screen, I've linked my splash screen to my home screen. Now, since I've linked it, I can set my transition level. So you may have noticed on your phone or mobile device that when you transition through various screens in your mobile apps, it'll either be instant, which is a none transition. You may notice that there's a slider on your screen, like the new screen will slide up to cover your previous screen. That's what's known as modal, or you can have push. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just show push. I originally had it as a transition none, so it was basically instant. It would load, show for about a second, and then immediately move to my home screen. You can do more advanced options. When does this happen? For example, you can set parameters for it happens sometimes, and that transition will happen based on the parameter that you've set. I'm not really going to worry about that right now. When it comes to available data, I have no linked data in here, but if I want to look at linked data, for example, my login screen doesn't have any linked data set for it, but I can link a screen to add more data to it. For example, if I have a form for sign up, user sign up, I can use that screen to add data to my login form so it recognizes it and it creates that database. Now, as I threatened, I'm going to go ahead and add a screen. There are a couple options. They give you simple screens, info screens, intro screens, listing screens, miscellaneous screens. The miscellaneous screens are a little weird. You can set up, for example, left side navigation rather than having a bar at the bottom or the top. Chat functions. I'm going to go ahead with chat. We'll just call it chat for now on the screen. Now you'll notice between cards and chat there's no arrow. These screens aren't linked. Chat's not linked to any other screens. So for purposes of the app creation, it's there, but no one will ever reach it because it's not actually connected to anything, which is why you want to make sure, for example, on your components, you're looking at, I find it easier to just go back to the screens and then go ahead and edit this way and look at the components. For example, actions, I'm going to add an action, I'm going to link it back to my card screen. Hey look, it's connected now. So it actually, now the app knows that my chat screen feeds into the card screen. The transition, I can have as push modal or none. I'm just going to go with modal. If I want to add additional actions, I can create a user, I can create a new collection, I can update a logged in user. It will allow me to delete a logged in user. Those are all functions that I can put onto the chat screen. Notifications, for example, I can use a trigger notification. When it triggers, who it triggers for. So for example, a logged in user, title, oops, body, and then I can select what screen I want to have this on. So it knows that the chat screen is the one I'm currently working on, but I'm going to go ahead and just add it to cards. When you're looking at the different apps, for example, if I want to, on the chat screen, if I want to add a component, I can do other options. For example, this is already set with a list. I can add a component if I want to add, for example, app bar. It's already on here, but I can take it, drag, drop. Well, I have it slightly off center here, but go ahead, app bar 5, my fill color, my screen title. When it looks at the title, it's automatic. It'll default certain text for you, but let's say it's free chat. And so I have all my screens linked in here. So I've got, when it comes to databases for users, I created one record just so that way it would actually show something when I log in. So if I choose to view and edit records, so I have email, their password is hidden, username is Sally, full name is Sally Sample. I created this a couple days ago. It's a neat little function. I'm not going to get into every single option, but just to give you kind of a high-level overview, let's say I'm done. Let's say I'm done because I've created my screens and I've already tested it. I'm going to go ahead and hit publish. Now it gives me a couple options. I can publish Android, I can publish iOS, or I can publish the progressive web app. I'm going to go ahead. Now if I try to publish this as an iOS app, it's going to need me to upgrade to that paid plan. That's where that high cost comes in. I'm going to go ahead and publish it as a progressive web app. You can either add it to a custom domain, but they will give you a previewer that you can use, published on previewer for Adalo. So I'm going to go ahead and open, and as you can see, it creates a new screen here. This button doesn't actually do anything, but if you want to sideload your app, it'll flip through the various screens on your app and then take you to whatever the end point is on your connections that you previously set up. So as you can see, mine ended up at cards. This button doesn't actually go anywhere, but just to show you, it will give you some basic functionality on moving through. The scan to install is if you want to try side loading your app onto your device. So side loading is a whole nother conversation for mobile apps, but essentially it's a way of allowing your app to be accessed and downloaded without having to go through a device's proprietary store. So you don't have to go through the App Store on iPhone, for example, or Google Play on your Samsung device. But that's a whole separate conversation for a whole separate set of concerns when you're talking about side loading and all these other fun options for your app. You can also preview before publishing, as I showed you before. It gives you a chance to kind of go through and see the different devices, as you can see here up in the right. So this is just a really high level overview of how this particular one works. This particular low-code app works. If you want to play around with it, I think it's a really nice idea, and it's a fun tool to kind of play with. And now that you've actually seen how some of this works, as the questions I have here are, for question 1, what type of mobile app would you choose to build and why? Question 2 is, when would it make sense to build a progressive web app over a standalone mobile app, and why or why not? And for question 3, it's, please describe an example of a mobile app you found useful or interesting that's from a library, museum, or cultural institution. What makes this app a good fit for the institution? Or if it's not a good fit, why is it not a good fit? The example I give here is for the American Museum of Natural History Explorer app, which is based in New York, which has an internal navigation system in the app that provides data on the exhibits as you tour around the museum. So it's more than just an audio tour. It actually gives you real-time data and information on the various exhibits as you walk around, which is actually kind of neat. So thank you very much for sitting through my presentation, and I hope that it was educational for you. Thank you.